I'm going to begin by telling you about the important discoveries we've made and the treatments we're developing. And that will be followed then by part 2 of my talk, which is really about how to significantly reduce our risk of getting Alzheimer's and other brain disorders. Now, first of all, people often ask me, why has it taken so long to develop a treatment for Alzheimer's disease? And there are a couple reasons. The main reason is that the brain is our most important organ, and it is protected by a blood-brain barrier that prevents harmful things that get into our bloodstream from getting into the brain where they might damage the brain. Now, of course, this barrier doesn't keep all harmful things out, but it does keep most of the harmful things out. Now, that's very good because the brain controls our breathing, our heart rate, and everything, not just our memory and our thinking and our emotions. But when you're trying to treat a brain disorder like Alzheimer's, it can be very difficult to get the treatment into the brain because the blood-brain barrier may block that. The other problem is that if you're just administering drugs as a pill or a shot, and the drug is going into the bloodstream, but you only want that drug to treat the brain, you can have adverse side effects because once in the bloodstream, that drug will go to the liver, the kidneys, the heart, the lungs, and other organs. So the blood-brain barrier and how to overcome it or get around it has been a serious impediment to developing treatments for brain disorders like Alzheimer's. The exciting thing is that actually at Health Partners Neuroscience, we have solved the problem of the blood-brain barrier for scientists and physicians around the world. And an unusual dream actually gave me the first clue as to how to do this. In 1989, I was trying to treat brain disorders with natural nerve growth factors. These nerve growth factors we knew could protect brain cells from damage, could cause them to repair, brain cells to help repair themselves and to make new connections with other brain cells. But we were having a lot of trouble because of the blood-brain barrier. And I went to sleep and I had a dream, and I was talking to other scientists in this dream and telling them that I thought these natural protein growth factors that our body makes, things like insulin or nerve growth factor and others, would be a good way to treat Alzheimer's. And they were telling me in the dream, well, these aren't going to work because these don't cross the blood-brain barrier. And of course, we did all know that this was true, but something occurred to me in the dream when I was having this discussion in my dream with other scientists, and it was that everyone knew there were harmful things that if they got into your nose, they could find their way into the brain. And I got a very simple idea, which was, if harmful things can do it, maybe good things can do it. And I woke up from this dream. I was quite excited about the prospect of using intranasal delivery to deliver therapeutics to the brain to treat Alzheimer's, stroke, Parkinson's, head injury, and other disorders. Now, intranasal delivery of therapeutics to the brain would be totally non-invasive. You're only talking about putting nose drops into the nose or perhaps a nasal spray. And the wonderful thing about this is that these therapeutics can then rapidly go to the brain directly from the nose, so you're bypassing the blood-brain barrier, by following the nerves involved in smell that connect the nose to the brain. Not only would you be able to get these therapeutics into the brain, where they wouldn't be able to reach the brain from the bloodstream because of the barrier, but you would not just get them into the brain, but you would reduce the exposure of all the other organs of the body to the drugs you're going to use. And that would eliminate many, if not most, of the unwanted side effects. So, and of course, when I had this dream, I did actually write a patent application, which was filed by our nonprofit foundation. And we knew it would take time for the patent office to examine this. And we began to do studies in mice and rats to show that, in fact, this would work, and found that it would. So this discovery allows us to effectively deliver therapeutics to the brain to treat all kinds of brain disorders. And the disorders we were particularly interested in were Alzheimer's and other memory disorders, stroke, which is the brain disorder that affects the most people, traumatic brain injury, spinal cord injury, post-traumatic stress disorder, and other disorders like movement disorders like Parkinson's or epilepsy, and even just treating the abnormal brain problems caused by diabetes. Now, Alzheimer's disease is the most common type of dementia or senility. Dementia is a general term that really describes brain disorders where you have a loss of recent memory. You have confusion and disorientation. People may not realize where they are or how they got there. They might be confused about what year it is or whether it's winter or summer. And Alzheimer's accounts for about 2/3 of the dementia cases, with the rest of them being caused by other dementing illnesses like Lewy body dementia, vascular dementia, frontotemporal dementia, and there's some others. Now, the most important thing that I want you to remember from this part of the presentation is that from studies that we did and other people, we knew that brain cell energy was very low in people with Alzheimer's disease. And we knew that insulin, the hormone insulin signaling, which tells our brain cells to take up blood sugar and break it down to make energy for our brain cells, we knew that insulin signaling was greatly decreased. So that's one big problem in Alzheimer's, not enough energy in the brain cells because there's not enough signaling of the brain cells by the hormone insulin. Another is we knew that iron was accumulating abnormally in the brain in people with Alzheimer's. And although we need iron, and we need iron in our diet for our hemoglobin, which carries the oxygen around our bloodstream, you don't want free iron accumulating in the brain because it can damage all kinds of important aspects, parts of the brain that we need to function. So this loss of brain cell energy, not enough insulin signaling, and too much iron in the brain that caused damage, these characterize not only Alzheimer's, but also Parkinson's, stroke, and a number of other disorders. Now let's start by talking about the abnormal accumulation of iron in the brain. We know that this occurs, as I've just told you, in Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, stroke, head injury, post-traumatic stress disorder, and other brain disorders. And this excess iron causes the production of molecules that are very reactive that damage key receptors in the brain, including the receptor required for memory and learning, and other key components required for normal movement, like you need to have normal movement, and other brain functions. Fortunately, there is a generic drug that has been around for more than 40 years called deferoxamine, which we just abbreviate DFO. And this drug binds iron very, very tightly and can essentially chelate that iron. And this has been used for many years to treat people who have too much iron in their bloodstream. Too much iron in the bloodstream can be caused by the fact that you've had a lot of blood transfusions, or you might have a disease like sickle cell anemia or something. So we knew that this drug was available. And there was even a 2-year clinical trial in patients with Alzheimer's where this iron binding drug, DFO, was given by intramuscular injection. And in fact, it reduced the decline of the Alzheimer patients by 50%. But unfortunately, it had a lot of serious adverse side effects. And this drug does not cross the blood-brain barrier very well. Consequently, we developed and patented intranasal deferoxamine, this iron-binding drug, to treat Alzheimer's, stroke, Parkinson's, and other disorders. Now, of course, if you want to develop a treatment for humans, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, is going to require you first to show in mice and rats that, in fact, your treatment gets to the brain, and also that it is safe, relatively safe in these animal studies, and that it's effective. So we began carrying out those animal studies, and we showed that when given intranasally to a mouse model of Alzheimer's disease, it very significantly reduced their memory loss. And if you gave it to normal, healthy mice, it actually improved their memory, making those mice smarter or better than regular healthy mice. Also, we were able to show that it could treat Parkinson's disease in mice and rats. And also just a few nose drops of this iron-binding drug given either before or after a major stroke reduced the brain damage in the animals by 55%. So the animals didn't become paralyzed by the stroke and they didn't die from the stroke. So this looks very, very promising. And as funding becomes available, we're going to be conducting clinical trials in people who have Alzheimer's and other brain disorders with this iron-binding drug, which is a generic drug that is available. Now let's talk about that loss of brain cell energy that I told you about that occurs in people with Alzheimer's. If you do a brain scan of a normal elderly adult, and you're seeing that on the right side of your screen, this was a 75-year-old woman where this brain scan was taken of a normal healthy adult, you see that there is a lot of uptake and metabolism into the brain cells of blood sugar or glucose. And it's the metabolism or breakdown of glucose that produces the energy that the brain cells need. However, if you take another woman who's 75 who has Alzheimer's and you do the same scan, you see there is very little blood sugar and glucose being taken up into the brain cells and metabolized to make energy. That is a serious problem. If you don't have enough energy in the brain, you're not going to be able to replace parts that wear out with aging or parts that are damaged by a disease like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. So what could we do to increase the uptake and metabolism of glucose and increase the brain cell energy? Well, the hormone insulin is the hormone that signals our cells to take up blood sugar and metabolize it to produce energy. And we know that insulin signaling is in fact reduced in the brains of people with Alzheimer's, causing them to essentially have diabetes of the brain, which leaves brain cells starved for energy and unable to function normally, unable to carry out memory function and a number of other functions. So our discoveries and our patents covering the intranasal delivery of insulin to the brain to treat Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, where this also occurs, have been followed by a number of human clinical trials. And multiple clinical trials in Alzheimer patients and in healthy human adults who don't have anything wrong with them have demonstrated improved memory following intranasal insulin treatment. And in these studies, there was no change in the blood levels of the hormone insulin or glucose because the insulin doesn't go from the nose into the bloodstream sufficient to change the levels, but it does reach the brain by following the nerves involved in smell. Now, these findings, this exciting result with intranasal insulin, is not too surprising because we knew already that diabetes doubles the risk for getting Alzheimer's disease. And we know that diabetics don't have enough insulin signaling, which is why many diabetics are prescribed insulin injections to put the insulin in the bloodstream. Those insulin injections, however, don't provide enough insulin to the brain. It does provide the insulin to the rest of the body. And so when you give intranasal insulin to normal healthy adults, you can actually see energy increase in the brain cells of normal healthy people with intranasal insulin, even though you're not altering the blood levels of insulin. And intranasal insulin improves not only memory in normal healthy adults and in people with mild cognitive impairment or Alzheimer's, but it also improves memory and walking speed in people who have adult onset diabetes. And it improves not just memory, but executive functioning, which is the ability to plan in normal healthy adults. What we don't know, though, is would intranasal insulin given to people who have diabetes or are at high risk for getting Alzheimer's, could that prevent them or reduce their risk for getting Alzheimer's disease? That would require a longitudinal study that would be quite expensive, and no one has gotten the money to carry out that kind of study so far. Now, we had actually received a patent from the US government for using intranasal insulin for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Now, a patent is separate from getting FDA approval to prescribe a treatment. So we're only talking about a patent that we received, but we never had the money to carry out the study in people with Parkinson's. We did do studies with others and by ourselves in people with Alzheimer's and mild cognitive impairment, but we didn't try Parkinson's. But fortunately, Harvard and University of Massachusetts had the money. And in 2019, they carried out a study in people with Parkinson's using our intranasal insulin treatment. And they observed that it was safe. They saw no adverse side effects, and that it helped to preserve the ability of people with Parkinson's to speak well, and it improved their memory. More importantly, because Parkinson's is a movement disorder, it improved their movement and it reduced their physical disability. So those were very important findings. Now, it was already known that if you had surgery on the brain surgery and deep brain stimulation, that could help some people who had Parkinson's. And recently it was shown that this kind of deep brain stimulation actually works in part by increasing glucose uptake and metabolism into the brain. So this surgical invasive method, improving people with Parkinson's, is consistent with our finding that the non-invasive intranasal insulin is beneficial to people with Parkinson's, as shown by this clinical trial done at Harvard. Also, most recently in China, the administration of intranasal insulin right before older people have surgeries where they're exposed to anesthesia for a long time can reduce the development of what's called postoperative delirium. Delirium is a kind of state of confusion that happens to many people who are older when they have surgeries that require extensive exposure to anesthesia. So intranasal insulin is being found to be effective in a variety of different conditions in human trials, which we're talking about here. We also have reason to believe from our animal studies that intranasal insulin is likely to treat other brain disorders. For example, traumatic brain injury. We have published studies with the U.S. Military Medical School showing that that animals that have had a head injury recover much better if given intranasal insulin, just insulin nose drops. And the United States Department of Defense, the DoD, has actually funded our development of this treatment in animals because they're very excited about this. Of course, it will have to go into clinical trials, And we're hoping to raise the money to do those human clinical trials as well. And there's a very strong rationale also to use intranasal insulin to treat post-traumatic stress disorder and also epilepsy. Now, a third treatment that is different from the intranasal iron binding drug or the intranasal insulin is the use of intranasal adult stem cells to treat Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and other brain disorders. When I talk about adult stem cells, I'm talking about stem cells that come from adult humans. All of us listening to this talk have stem cells in our bone marrow and in a number of our other types of cells. So when you take stem cells from adults, you can then show that if you give them intranasally, they go directly from the nose to the brain, just like the insulin and the iron binding drug does. And that in fact, stem cells are like little doctors, and they can detect where the damage is in the brain. And they don't go all over the brain, those adult stem cells. They only go to the damaged or diseased areas. And most brain disorders involve inflammation of the brain, but these stem cells are very anti-inflammatory. And when they reach the brains of animals, they eliminate the inflammation and they provide to the animals what they need to regenerate or to help to treat these various brain disorders. This is a table of studies that have been done around the world in different laboratories in different countries using our patented intranasal stem cell method to treat brain disorders. The first one on the list is Parkinson's. And this was done with our collaborator, Lucina Danielen in Germany. And we showed that the bone marrow-derived stem cells, when given intranasally to animals that had Parkinson's, only go to the damaged areas, that it eliminates the brain inflammation, and that the stem cells can produce and release the dopamine needed to help these animals start moving. Similarly, we also showed in Alzheimer's animals that we could improve memory and decrease amyloid, etc. In the Netherlands, several researchers, including Cindy van Veldhoven, have shown they can treat neonatal brain damage that can occur right after birth. At Emory, they showed they could treat stroke. In Sweden, they could treat multiple sclerosis, all with intranasal therapeutic cells. University of Chicago, we collaborated with them to treat brain tumors. And Japanese researchers have shown even effects in spinal cord injury models. Now, people are beginning to do these intranasal stem cell treatments now in humans. And a group in China has reported efficacy outcomes after intranasal administration of stem cells in children with cerebral palsy. So they reported this was beneficial, but that's only the first attempt to look at this in cerebral palsy. The bottom little bullet there just tells you that last year I started a company called Intrepicite to help companies that have stem cells and to teach them essentially how to deliver their proprietary stem cells to treat brain disorders, because we want to move this forward. Now, the most recent report from China is a very exciting one, because they did a study in people with advanced Parkinson's. Their intention was only to show in this study that their stem cells were in fact safe. It was considered what's called a phase 1 clinical trial. But they were shocked and surprised to find that even in people with advanced Parkinson's, the treatment was associated with functional improvement in several clinical outcomes that peaked around 6 months after they were given the stem cells. So they have already announced they're moving on to phase 2 clinical trials. And of course, people are very excited about this initial finding. Now I'm going to now move to the second phase of my presentation to you and talk to you about preventing memory loss and reducing the risk of Alzheimer's disease. The first thing you need to do is protect your brain from injury. That means you need to wear your seatbelts when you're driving a car. You need to wear a helmet if you're on a motorcycle or bicycle or what have you, or certainly playing contact sports. You also need to think about purchasing and using air purifiers, particularly in these days with climate change, where we have these very extensive wildfires. These wildfires are putting dangerous particulates into the air. And when you breathe that polluted air, unless you have an air purifier in your home that's removing those, that can damage your brain. Obviously, in some areas where lead is in the water or something like that, you would also want to have a water purifier. The second most important thing is exercise. Exercise is very important to the brain. Your best bet is to try to exercise 3 times a week for about 45 minutes each time, where you're elevating your breathing and your heart rate. Now, this can come from taking a walk, jogging, swimming, doing yoga. There are all kinds of ways, gardening, there are all kinds of exercise. The next thing is diet, and we're going to come back to these in some detail. The Mind diet and the Mediterranean diet. These are the 2 diets that have been found to be the most beneficial because the foods in these diets contain the antioxidants and anti-inflammatory natural bioflavonoids that are good for your brain. It's also important to keep mentally and socially active and to reduce stress. Stress can be harmful because stress can increase the hormone cortisol, and cortisol blocks the uptake and metabolism of glucose into the brain in the areas involved in memory and emotional response. So reducing stress by meditation or other means and keeping mentally and socially active. And finally, you want to talk to your physician to make sure that they're checking, hopefully, that you're not becoming deficient in vitamin B12 or thyroid hormone, and that your vitamin D levels are normal or above normal. Now, let's just talk for a few more minutes about exercise. In a recent study, when they combined the results of 11 different studies, they found that regular exercise in midlife can significantly reduce the risk of developing dementia by about 30%. And if you look at the risk for developing Alzheimer's specifically, the risk was reduced by about 45%. So exercise is really important. What does exercise do? Well, one of the things it does is it restores insulin sensitivity and insulin action in the brains of people, especially in sedentary adults who might be overweight. Also, exercise is recommended for the elderly and for those in the early to middle stages of dementia, not just here in the United States, but in the United Kingdom and other places. It's recommended. Exercise also helps people with Parkinson's. And most recently, using some fairly high-tech imaging in Parkinson's patients, they've shown that it actually increases the dopamine transporter in the brain. That takes up and utilizes dopamine, which is really important because people with Parkinson's normally don't have enough dopamine signaling. Now, we know that plants and humans have evolved together over many, many years, and plants are not only the major source of our food and nutrients, but they're also the source of many of our medicines. They're the original source for about 40% of the pharmaceuticals in use in the United States. And, you can think about, for example, digitalis for treating heart problems, or aspirin. Digitalis comes from the foxglove plants, or aspirin, which can be found in willow bark and other places. in plants that is obviously helpful for headache and other things. So foods that come from plants can have not only nutrient value, but can have pharmacologic effects on our brains. Now, the MIND diet is associated with a reduced incidence of Alzheimer's. This is a study where they looked at a prospective study where they looked at 923 participants between 58 and 98 years of age and followed them for about 5 years. And in this study, they found that the people who adhered most closely to the MIND diet had protection against the development of Alzheimer's. Now, this isn't 100% protection, but the estimated effect was a 53% reduction in the rate of getting Alzheimer's for people who most closely followed the MIND diet, and for a 35% reduction for people who moderately followed the MIND diet. What's in the MIND diet? Well, here is a list. The very first one, and probably one of the most important, is to eat green leafy vegetables. That would include things like spinach. Remember Popeye, who always ate his spinach. It's no wonder Olive Oyl liked him. So Olive liked him. So green leafy vegetables. Now, I'm going to go down to olive oil at the bottom because there are a lot of studies showing how important olive oil is. To use that as your main cooking oil, not butter, not Crisco, not other kinds of fats. So if I had to point to two things that were the most important, I would say green leafy vegetables and using olive oil and not these other kinds of fats for cooking. Also, obviously, other vegetables, things like broccoli or any other vegetables. Eating nuts like walnuts, pistachios, sunflower nuts, having berries, particularly blueberries and strawberries, eating beans, whole grains, fish, particularly the fatty fish like salmon, tuna, herring, sardines, or black cod, having chicken or turkey a couple times a week. And the MIND diet recommends 1 glass of wine a day. Wine probably, in part, reduces stress and relaxes you, but it does also contain these natural bioflavonoids like quercetin, myrcetin, and other resveratrol and other things that can be helpful to the brain. The MIND diet also recommends we eat less red meat. It doesn't say you can't have a steak twice a week. It just says, don't just be a meat and potatoes person if you want to have a good diet. Eat less butter and margarine. Eat less cheese. That's a hard one for me. And eat less pastries, sweets, fried and fast foods. Now, both the MIND diet and the Mediterranean diet are associated with less Alzheimer brain pathology from studies that have been done. And higher green leafy vegetable intake, as I told you already, is also particularly associated with less Alzheimer pathology. The fruits, vegetables in these diets, along with green tea, olive oil, and certain spices like turmeric, contain these natural antioxidants, anti-inflammatory bioflavonoids. And many of these bioflavonoids actually bind iron. For example, quercetin found in fruits and vegetables binds iron. Caffeic acid found in mushrooms, tea, and coffee binds iron. Ferulic acid found in apples, oranges, and bananas binds iron. Green tea has catechins. Vanilla and curcumin, the active ingredient in the spice turmeric found in curries, also can bind iron. So these antioxidant, iron-binding natural substances found in food mimic the actions of this deferoxamine iron-binding drug I told you about in the very beginning of this talk. It's probably better to say the opposite or the inverse of that, which is the drug deferoxamine mimics the action of these very things that are so good for you that are in a good diet. So treating and preventing Alzheimer's, the most recent study suggests that the MIND diet reduces the risk for Alzheimer's. Turmeric and green tea can also be very helpful. And we need to not just wait around for big pharma to come up with a drug, but also visit the little farmer at the farmer's market and get the good things we need to eat. So diet, exercise, remaining socially and mentally active. These are all important, along with reducing stress, for reducing our risk for Alzheimer's and other brain disorders. And the discoveries we've made, like intranasal delivery, which is now used all over the world by people researching these brain disorders and by people developing new treatments, this discovery of nose-to-brain delivery, and particularly of intranasal insulin, intranasal iron binding drugs, and intranasal adult stem cells, is moving us toward FDA approval to treat and prevent Alzheimer's and these other brain disorders. Now, this is just a picture of the MIND diet. You see here the greens, which I think in this case might have been spinach or kale. You see the Minnesota wild rice, the grains, and you see salmon in this case, along with a glass of wine. So that brings me to the end of my presentation, and this just gives you my contact information should you have further questions, or if you want to speak to someone in our foundation, we have the contact information for Julie Schimmelpfennig. Thank you for paying attention.